It was a quiet Friday afternoon in Oakwood Heights, the kind of neighborhood where everything gleamed just enough to say, "You don't belong here." Berkeley and Row wasn't just a supermarket, it was a statement, the kind of place where a single avocado costs as much as a full dinner in the next zip code. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't here to prove anything. No cameras, no staff, just a woman in a beige trench coat, holding a cloth bag that read, "Speak truth, even if your voice shakes." She moved through the aisles, calmly inspecting produce, comparing prices, ignoring the awkward stares that followed her every step. A woman bent down near the cheese section to tie her shoes, but never made eye contact. A teenager subtly pulled out her phone and aimed it at Jasmine. And then came the whisper, soft but sharp. "She's been pacing. Something's off about her." That's all it took. Overhead, the loudspeaker chimed like any other store announcement. "Security to fresh produce. Section 3. Possible incident." Jasmine froze, staring at the red grapes in her hand. She knew that tone. It was the same coded language she'd heard in Capitol Hill hearings. But this time, it wasn't theoretical. It was aimed directly at her. Footsteps approached, deliberate, rhythmic. Two officers appeared, one older, eyes like granite. The other younger, already gripping his belt like it might suddenly need defending. "Ma'am," the older one said, "we've had a report about suspicious behavior. Care to explain why you've been walking around without purchasing anything?" Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'm picking fruit," she replied calmly. Didn't realize choosing between red and green grapes was a criminal offense. But this wasn't about grapes. It wasn't even about shopping. Within minutes, the store manager showed up. "A few customers feel unsafe," he muttered, eyes darting around. And before she could show her parking ticket or even pull out her ID, the cold steel of the cuffs snapped shut around her wrists. No one stepped in. Not one voice asked, what did she do wrong? Because deep down, they all thought they already knew the answer. And in that silence, a storm had just begun. The handcuffs were cold, too tight. Jasmine Crockett didn't resist, not because she agreed, but because she understood. In that moment, she wasn't a congresswoman. She was just another black woman being escorted out of a luxury store for making people uncomfortable. She didn't yell, she didn't cry, she didn't even blink. But as she was walked past the checkout lanes, every glance around her said the same thing. She doesn't look like us. And in places like this, that was often enough. The classical music continued playing Bach, maybe Vivaldi, something so polished it made the tension feel even colder. A small girl tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, "Mommy, why is that lady in trouble?" The mother didn't answer, just walked away faster. The officers said nothing as they led Jasmine outside. But they didn't have to. Their silence was full of assumption, full of power. And as they reached the patrol car, Jasmine noticed something that stopped her breath for half a second. A young man near the exit. White t-shirt, baseball cap, phone in hand. Recording. Jordan Carter was only 21, a journalism major. He'd come to Berkeley and Row to buy almond milk for his mom. But now, he stood frozen, watching a woman in cuffs who hadn't raised her voice or caused any harm, just stood in the wrong aisle too long. He'd heard the managers whisper, saw the officers nod to each other. He didn't know who she was, not yet. But he knew what he saw wasn't right. So he hit record. "Excuse me, sir." An employee called from across the lobby. Jordan didn't move. He just held the camera steady, as Jasmine was placed in the back seat of the patrol car. Inside the car, Jasmine sat quietly, watching her reflection in the tinted glass. She didn't know anyone had recorded the moment. She just knew that this wouldn't be the last time someone was cuffed for looking out of place. But something about today felt different. Maybe it was the sharp cut on her wrist from the cuffs. Maybe it was the way the manager had refused to meet her eyes. Or maybe it was the calm defiance that burned quietly in her chest. Either way, the silence had started to crack. Because what none of them knew, not the officers, not the shoppers, not even Jordan, was that the woman they'd just arrested sat on the House Judiciary Committee. She'd read thousands of reports like this, but now, she wasn't holding the file. She was the file. And across town, a man would soon receive a phone call that would change the fate of every person in that precinct. But first, they had to drive her to the one place that was never supposed to be seen from the inside. Precinct 18. You thought the story ended with handcuffs? You thought being dragged out in public was the worst part? Think again. Because what happens next doesn't take place in front of shoppers. It doesn't get live streamed. It happens quietly, in the back rooms of a police station where no one is watching. This is where the real injustice lives. Not in the arrest, but in the paperwork. And tonight, Jasmine Crockett walks straight into the heart of it. The squad car came to a stop without sirens. No flashing lights, no loud announcements. Just the quiet hum of a system too confident in its own secrecy. Jasmine Crockett stepped out, wrists still cuffed. Before her stood Precinct 18, a building she had read about in countless oversight memos, never imagining she'd walk through its doors as a suspect. She immediately noticed the first red flag. The body cams weren't on. The small red lights that should have blinked on the officers' uniforms? Dark. Intentional. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered. Paint peeled from the walls. The air smelled of old coffee and bleach, but couldn't quite hide the scent of cover-ups. No one greeted her. No one read her rights again. She was pushed into a chair in a dim corner, still cuffed. Still silent. At the desk nearby, a woman in uniform, Turner, sipped coffee while calmly dragging video files into a trash bin on her screen. Jasmine leaned slightly to the side, her eyes scanning the monitor. File name: Market, Maine, Aisle, 14_1542, MP4. Status: deleted. One click. No password, no approval. One click, and the truth vanished. But Jasmine wasn't just watching. She was memorizing. Every name badge, every timestamp. The smell of Turner's coffee, the label on the screen, the sound of Mitchell's voice in the hallway, saying into his phone, she was loitering. Aggressive. Nobody knows who she is yet. The report goes to Judge Whitaker by morning. Judge Whitaker. The very man Jasmine had grilled in a congressional hearing 6 months ago for suppressing civil suits tied to police abuse. This wasn't random. It was orchestrated. The deeper she sat in that chair, the more she realized. Precinct 18 wasn't dysfunctional, it was efficient. A well-oiled machine for turning innocent people into guilty paperwork. Harris walked by with a draft report. Jasmine caught the header. Subject: unknown black female. Charge: suspicious behavior. Action: force applied. She didn't scream, didn't demand a lawyer. Because she didn't need to yet. She had already seen more in 30 minutes than most investigators caught in months. And all she needed now was one chance to expose it. What they didn't know was that the woman they had shackled, sidelined, and tried to erase was about to flip the entire precinct upside down from inside the system. The desk phone was old, beige plastic, slightly cracked. But it was unlocked, left carelessly by the woman who had just finished deleting the last piece of evidence. The room was quiet, cameras still off. Mitchell had stepped into the hallway. Harris was nowhere to be seen. Turner, gone to refill her coffee. This was the gap. The one chance. Jasmine leaned forward, wrists still cuffed, and reached for the receiver with both hands. Her fingers dialed quickly. *9. Then the federal emergency line code. She knew it by heart. She had helped write it. The line rang once. Twice. Then, hello? A voice she hadn't heard in weeks, but one she'd never stopped trusting. Jeremiah, it's me. Silence. Then a shift. His voice dropped into that calm, razor-edged tone Jasmine had only heard in Senate hearings. Where are you? Are you safe? Precinct 18, she whispered. They don't know who I am. They've already wiped the footage. The reports are fake. Whitaker and Kensington are in on it. On the other end, Jeremiah Crockett, U.S. Attorney General, stood up from his desk in Washington, D.C. The storm had landed. But this time it had a name. And blood on the inside. I'm coming, he said, every word sharp as steel. I want all files, civil complaints, body cam logs, arrest records. Activate the bureau, tonight. Jasmine hung up, calm, still cuffed. But now, everything had changed. Precinct 18 was no longer operating in the dark. The highest legal authority in the country had just turned its eyes straight toward it. At 6:03 a.m., the streets were still quiet. Coffee shops barely open. School buses just starting their routes. But in front of Precinct 18, silence gave way to a storm. A convoy of 17 black SUVs stopped in perfect formation. 30 federal agents in tactical gear stepped out swift, focused, and unstoppable. No warning. No shouting. Just federal authority landing like a hammer. Inside, Brad Mitchell had just finished signing the fake incident report. He barely looked up before two agents grabbed him from behind. "You're under arrest for obstruction of justice, falsifying evidence, and unlawful detention." Slam. His face hit the floor before his brain caught up. Down the hall, Officer Harris froze. He dropped his coffee. Tried to speak, but a firm hand twisted his wrist back and pinned him to the wall. Turner was next. She was deleting another file when an agent yanked the keyboard away. "You're done," the agent said. "And everything you erased? We're pulling it back." Upstairs, Chief Callahan watched it unfold on the hallway monitor. His mouth went dry. He reached for the phone. Deadline. By the time he opened his door, two agents stood waiting. "Sir, you're coming with us." And then, the moment, the steel door creaked open, and Jasmine Crockett, still in the same beige trench coat, stepped into the hallway. No cuffs. No guards. Just silence. The agents stood shoulder to shoulder on both sides. Not as a barrier, but as a tribute. She walked through them slowly, not with rage, not with pride, but with purpose. Everyone who once ignored her now watched in awe, because she wasn't just a survivor of Precinct 18. She was its reckoning. The courtroom was full by 5 a.m. Journalists, civil rights leaders, senators, all waiting for the same thing. Jasmine Crockett's testimony. 3 men sat in the defendant's row. Robert Callahan, the precinct chief. William Whitaker, the judge who buried cases. James Kensington, the mayor who kept it all funded. No ties, no power, just gray prison uniforms and hollow eyes. Jasmine stepped onto the witness stand. No makeup, no speechwriters, just a woman with a memory sharper than steel. They didn't know my name, and they didn't care. Because in their world, a black woman in a trench coat isn't a customer. She's a threat. The courtroom went still. She listed times, dates, words Mitchell whispered, files Turner deleted. Every moment documented from memory. And then, the door opened. Jordan Carter entered. Nervous, but holding something powerful in his hand, a small USB drive. "I backed it up," he said, "before they made me delete it." The screen lit up. There it was. Mitchell grabbing Jasmine. Harris cuffing her. The manager's trembling face. The moment Jasmine was thrown into the fruit stand, gasps echoed through the courtroom. A woman near the back cried quietly. Even the judge sat back in silence. Then bonus footage Jordan never meant to capture. His own interrogation. No cameras. No lawyers. Just fists and threats from the very people now facing trial. The verdict came swift. Callahan, 32 years. Whitaker, 35 years. Kensington, 28 years and full seizure of all hidden assets. The court ruled that funds from their estate's properties, shell companies, offshore accounts would go to a community justice restoration fund to rebuild the neighborhoods they'd exploited. Outside, a crowd erupted in tears and applause. Inside, Jasmine stood still. No victory speech. Just one quiet glance toward Jordan. Because justice wasn't loud. It was real. And finally, it had a face the country couldn't ignore. Precinct 18, once known as a place where truth went to die, was now unrecognizable. The holding cells were gone. The cold concrete replaced with warm lighting, open glass walls, and rows of bookshelves. A new name gleamed on the front door. The Eleanor Community Justice Center. Under it, a single line etched in brass. Where silence once ruled, justice now speaks. Inside, classrooms replaced interrogation rooms. Children sat in circles learning about their rights. Former inmates taught workshops on how to document police encounters. And at the heart of this transformation stood two people who once watched from the sidelines. Lisa Carter, the only officer at Precinct 18 who had dared to file an internal concern. Now the director of the National Police Oversight Bureau, she investigated misconduct nationwide. Her motto was simple: we don't punish officers, we protect the public. Jordan Carter, the young man who recorded it all. Now one of the most respected investigative journalists in the country. His column, The Undercurrent, gave voice to those who had long been ignored. He didn't chase headlines. He chased truth. And Jasmine? She turned down every interview, every book deal, every Senate pitch. Instead, she packed a small bag, left her office in D.C., and returned to her district. Not as a politician, but as a teacher. A modest sign hung above the door. Community Law and Justice. Instructor, Jasmine Crockett. She didn't teach from textbooks. She taught from lived experience, from handcuffs, from memory, from truth. And each week, as she stood before a classroom of young people, she'd ask one question. When power gets quiet, who will still speak? Justice didn't need a stage. It needed someone brave enough to stay behind and build what comes after the verdict. And Jasmine Crockett did exactly that. She never raised her voice, never needed a podium. And yet Jasmine Crockett stood taller than any title ever could. I didn't come to lead from above, she once told a student. I came to stand beside you, so no one could ever silence you again. In the end, she didn't ask to be remembered. But she was. Not with statues, but in classrooms, in murals, in quiet nods from people who finally knew they were seen. Her legacy didn't scream. It whispered where it mattered. In the voice of a teenager who dared to film. In the courage of a detective who finally told the truth. In the steady hand of a teacher writing, "Know your rights," on a dusty whiteboard. Jasmine Crockett taught us that sometimes the most powerful act isn't fighting back. It's remembering and refusing to forget. If this story moved you, if you believe truth has power, even when whispered, then remember this. You don't need to wear a badge or hold a title. You just need to be the one who won't look away. Because that's where justice begins. Right here. With you.